arrived at Bighorn a little after 2 in the afternoon, when the sun was already too low to warm anything. Terry had called me on Thursday saying the forecast was showing serious snow for the weekend. Not the light October kind you just ignore, but the first real one that actually closes roads. They needed all 12 cabins sealed before it hit. Phil Garrett was going to be at the entrance until 6, and after that it was just me until morning. Wasn't the kind of job I needed explained twice. Winterizing a cabin is straightforward work. Drain the pipes, shut off the pilot heater, seal the windows with foam tape, check the locks, log it on the form. 12 cabins. I figured 4 hours if everything went smooth. 6 if any of the boilers gave me trouble. I grabbed my kit from the back seat of the truck and started with cabin 1. Bighorn is a nice park in the summer. In November, it feels like something else entirely. The trees go black against a white sky, and the ground is stuck somewhere in between. No leaves, no snow, just a thin rust-colored mud that sticks to the soles of your boots. The silence changes too. In summer there are birds, families hollering near the lake, kids slamming car doors. That day there was none of that. Just the intermittent wind coming down off Cloud Peak and whatever noise I was making myself. I finished the first 5 cabins without incident. Cabin 3 had a dripping pipe under the sink that hadn't been in the previous report. I noted it, photographed it, did a temporary fix with thread seal tape I carry specifically for that. Cabin 5 smelled like a dead mouse inside the wall, but that's a spring problem. I logged it and moved on. Around 4:30, I knocked on the window of the control booth to say goodbye to Phil. He had a coffee in his hand and the look of a man who'd rather be somewhere else, which, to be fair, was Phil's default expression in any situation. We exchanged maybe 3 minutes of conversation about the Cowboys game neither of us had really watched, and then he left. I listened to his car fade down the Cloud Peak scenic byway, and then heard nothing at all. Cabin 6 went fast. Cabin 7 took longer because the bathroom window was stuck, and I had to work the frame loose with a chisel before I could get it sealed. I vaguely remembered the same window giving me trouble the year before. Not at this park, at another one in Montana, but windows swollen with moisture all looked the same. I spent about 20 minutes on that. When I finished cabin 7 and headed to 8, I realized I'd left my flashlight on the kitchen counter in 7. I went back, let myself in, picked it up. The flashlight was right where I'd left it, but the chair I had pushed into the corner, because I needed room to get through with the toolbox, was in the middle of the room. I stood there looking at it for maybe 10 seconds. It's not the kind of thing that makes you stop breathing. It's the kind of thing that makes you think, did I actually push it? I ran through the motion in my head. Yes, I had pushed it. I could remember the metal leg scraping against the hardwood floor, but the chair was sitting in the center of the room, like someone had sat down in it and then gotten up without putting it back. I pushed it into the corner, walked out, locked the door. Outside, the wind had picked up a little. The sky was closing fast, that flat lead-gray color that comes right before real snow. I checked my watch, 5:20. I still had 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 ahead of me, plus the main lodge where I'd be spending the night. I didn't have time to stand around thinking about a chair. I got on the radio to check in with Terry. She picked up on the second call, asked how things were going. I told her I was on track. She said the forecast had gotten a little worse, possible 8 inches by morning. She asked if I needed anything. I said no. She said she'd call again at 10 to confirm everything was okay. I signed off and went to cabin 8. The smell that followed me the last 50 feet to the door of cabin 8 was strange. Not the dead mouse smell from cabin 5. I knew that one. This was something else. Wetter, heavier, with some undertone I couldn't put a name to right then. The smell of something organic that had been left out in the cold too long, like the inside of an old barn, but not quite. It was gone by the time I stepped inside. I finished 8 and 9 before it got completely dark. The last 3 cabins I worked by flashlight, which isn't a problem. I do it often enough that I don't need to see what I'm doing. The snow started while I was sealing cabin 11. Fine grains, almost invisible, floating through the beam of the flashlight. The kind of snow that seems like nothing and covers everything while you're not looking. I loaded my gear into the truck at 7:40. Walked up to the main lodge, 300 meters above the cabins. on top of a small rise with a view of the park's main entrance. I went in, turned on the heater, put water on to boil. I'd brought instant noodles and 2 sandwiches, because that's what I always bring. I ate without thinking about much of anything. Spent a while staring at my phone without opening anything. Then I remembered I needed to call my niece. She'd texted the week before saying the baby had a fever, and I'd forgotten to write back. I called, she didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking if everything was okay and said I'd call properly over the weekend. It was 9 o'clock. Outside, the snow fell in silence. I lay down with my clothes on because the heater took a while to kick in. I woke up at 2:18 in the morning without knowing why. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a dream. It was the kind of waking up that happens when something shifts in the environment and your body catches it before your brain does. I lay still for a moment, listening. The heater was running. The rhythmic click of the element, the low hum I'd already stopped noticing was there. Wind outside, stronger than before. Nothing out of the ordinary. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. I couldn't. I lay there for about 15 minutes with my eyes closed, my head nowhere in particular. I thought about the pipe in cabin 3. I should have logged it in the digital report too, not just on paper. I thought about my niece. The baby was 8 months old, and I'd never seen him in person, only in photos. He'd be turning 1 in March, and I already knew I'd probably just mail a gift instead of showing up. I got up at 2:40 and went to the bathroom. Through the hallway window, I could see the snow had stopped. The ground outside was white and smooth, no tracks anywhere, lit faintly by the security light that stayed on all night on a pole near the parking area. That light always bothered me. Not because it's bright, but because it throws long shadows on everything, makes the trees look taller than they are. I went back to bed. This time I slept. At 7 in the morning, I was up with coffee on the stove and the final inspection form open on the table. I needed to do a walkthrough of all 12 cabins to confirm everything was sealed, log it in Terry's system, and then I could leave. 2 hours of work, 3 at most if snow had piled up against any of the doors. Outside, it was around -8, I figured. The kind of cold that stiffens the leather of your boots and makes your fingers hurt before you get where you're going. I put on 2 pairs of socks, my orange work coat, rubber gloves under the wool ones. I grabbed the form and the flashlight out of habit, even though it was already daylight. The first 6 cabins were exactly as I'd left them. Foam tape intact, doors locked, no sign that anything had been disturbed. The snow had built up about 5, maybe 6 inches, enough to cover the path between the cabins in a clean, even white. Almost clean. Between cabin 6 and cabin 7, there were marks in the ground. I stood there looking at them for a length of time I couldn't say. My first thought was, large animal. My second thought was that I couldn't fit what I was seeing into any animal I actually knew. They weren't clean tracks. The snow was pressed down at uneven intervals, like something heavy had passed through without lifting its feet. More of a drag than a step. In some spots, the impression was deeper on one side, as if the weight was distributed in a strange way. The distance between one mark and the next was too wide for a dog, too wide for a deer. Elk, maybe. Moose could do something like that. I'd seen moose tracks before. But moose leave hoofprints, and there were no hoofprints here. What was here were wide, irregular surface impressions, with something that looked like fingers in one of the clearer marks. I crouched down to get a better look. The clearest mark was about 6 feet from the porch of cabin 7. Wide, asymmetrical, with uneven pressure along the outer edge, as if the weight was being carried to one side. I photographed it with my phone. Kept going. Cabin 7 was locked, door shut, foam tape on the window intact. I walked a full loop around the structure along the edge of the porch. The marks continued. They came from somewhere in the direction of the dense forest to the north, passed close along the porch, and then stopped. They didn't continue south. They didn't go into the brush on the east side. They just ended about 10 feet past the porch, as if whatever had made them had stood there for a while, and then backed up the exact same way it came. I walked to where the marks stopped, turned around and looked back at the cabin. From that position, someone, or something, would have had a direct line of sight to the side window and the porch entrance. I continued the inspection. Cabin 8, 9, 10, all good. Cabin 11, sealed. At cabin 12, the tape on one of the windows had lifted at a corner from the cold. I resealed it, logged it. Back at the lodge, I called Terry. She picked up on the third ring, with the voice of someone in the middle of something else. I told her the inspection was done. Everything was sealed. And I mentioned the tracks between cabins 6 and 7. She asked if I thought they were elk. I said I didn't know. She said there had been reports of a bear that hadn't hibernated yet in the eastern section of the park near Tensleep Canyon, and that it might be coming down with the cold. She said she'd notify the wildlife management team. I told her I could send the photos by text. She said, yes, go ahead. I sent them. She responded with, I'll pass these along, which is exactly the kind of answer that doesn't mean much. I closed my phone and stood in the lodge kitchen for a moment with my coffee cup in my hand. The coffee was cold. I must have spent more time outside than I'd figured. It wasn't a bear. I didn't need a wildlife specialist to tell me that. All you had to do was look at the distance between one mark and the next, look at where the weight had settled. Bears leave different tracks, even when they're moving in an unusual way. What bothered me wasn't what the marks were. It was where they stopped. 10 feet past the porch of cabin 7, no continuation, no visible alternate path. As if whatever had made them had stood there for some time and then backed up the exact same way it had come. I picked up the form, logged everything that needed to be logged, signed it, put it away. I was hungry, but I didn't eat anything. Terry called at 10:30 in the morning to say Marcus wasn't going to make it. She said, not feeling well, which was the phrase she used when she didn't want to go into it. Marcus Webb was in his mid-40s and had been working the seasonal parks in the area longer than I had. We'd crossed paths on 2 jobs before. Never got close. But he was the kind of guy you work well with because he does what needs to be done without any runaround. He was supposed to help me haul the backup generator to the storage shed and check the wiring in the main lodge before the snow locked everything down. Without Marcus, I had to redistribute the work. The generator I could drag in alone with the hydraulic cart, but it would take longer. The wiring I wasn't going to touch. That could wait until spring or until Terry sent someone else. I said fine and hung up. I spent the morning in the lodge reorganizing what needed to get done. There was a leak in the roof of the utility area that the snow was going to make worse. I put a bucket under it, photographed it, logged it. One of the hallway lights had been flickering since I arrived. That slow pulse of a bulb that's dying by degrees. I changed the bulb. The new one held steady for about 10 minutes and then started doing the same thing. It wasn't the bulb, it was the socket or the wiring. I noted it for Terry and decided to leave it alone. A flickering light never killed anybody. I had lunch around noon. The sandwich I'd saved from the night before was dried out at the edges, but I ate it anyway. I sat listening to the wind outside rise and fall in uneven cycles. The temperature had dropped further. Through the window glass, I could see the snow that had piled up on the lodge porch railing getting stiffer, less powdery. Around 1 in the afternoon, I walked to the storage shed to get the hydraulic cart. The shed was about 80 yards from the lodge, down the small rise toward the cabins. It was a low gray metal structure with 2 heavy sliding doors that always jammed in winter because the track contracted in the cold. I'd been there the previous afternoon grabbing extra tape and hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. I noticed it now. In the snow in front of the shed there were marks similar to the ones I'd seen between cabins 6 and 7. Not identical. The snow here was newer. It had fallen after the ones I'd photographed in the morning, so the layer was different. But the pattern was the same. Wide impressions, weight distributed unevenly, the distance between marks greater than any animal from that region would easily account for. I stood looking at them for a moment, then I looked around. The forest started about 100 feet north of the shed. Dense pines, dark trunks, no visibility past the first 30 feet or so. The wind was moving the upper branches, but the trunks were still, and between the trunks there was no movement I could make out. I photographed the marks and opened the shed. Inside, everything was in order. The generator at the back, the hydraulic cart leaning against the left wall, shelves with maintenance supplies, cardboard boxes with packed up summer equipment. The smell of a closed shed in winter. Cold metal, rubber, a little grease. Normal. I grabbed the cart and went back out. That's when the dogs started. They weren't park dogs. The park doesn't have dogs. They were the 2 German shepherds from the private property that borders the northeast edge of Bighorn, about 300 yards downhill. I'd heard them barking the day before when I arrived, the kind of territorial bark a dog does when it sees an unfamiliar vehicle. Normal barking. What they were doing now was not normal barking. It was the kind of sound a dog makes when it can't decide between attacking and running. High-pitched, clipped, without the steady rhythm of territorial barking. It kept going for about 2 minutes, rising in intensity, and then stopped abruptly. It didn't taper off. It just stopped. I stood there with the cart in my hand, looking in the direction of the sound. The silence after was different from the silence before. Can't explain that well. The park had been quiet all morning, but it was the silence of an empty place in winter. The kind that has the texture of wind and wood contracting in the cold. The silence after the dog stopped had a different quality, more closed off. I shook it off and went to get the generator. The trip from the shed to the service entrance of the lodge took about 40 minutes with the generator on the cart. Snow had built up on the path, and the cart sank with every step. I was sweating inside my coat despite the cold. By the time I finally got the generator up against the wall of the utility area, my shoulders were aching and I was breathing hard. I went to get some water, stood in the hallway for a moment with my back against the wall, letting my breathing even out. The hallway light pulsed slowly. That's when I noticed that the door to cabin 7 was ajar. I could see it from where I stood. The lodge sits on the rise above the cabins, and through the hallway window, cabins 6, 7, and 8 are in a direct line of sight. The door to cabin 7 was open maybe 8-10 inches. I had locked that door the previous afternoon. I had checked the seal that morning. I stood at the window and watched for a while. There was no movement around the cabin. The snow in front of the door was disturbed, but I couldn't make out any pattern from where I was standing. I put my coat back on, grabbed the master key, and walked down to cabin 7. The door was in fact open. The lock hadn't been forced. The latch was retracted as if someone had opened it from the inside with the handle, which makes no sense because the inside handle on these cabins is the same as the outside, and both require a key. The foam tape on the window was intact. Nothing inside was out of place, except the chair. Back in the center of the room, I locked cabin 7 again and walked back to the lodge without running. I didn't run because running would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I walked at my normal pace, breathing steady, looking at the ground in front of my feet the way I do when I'm thinking. The snow muffled the sound of my boots. The wind had dropped a little, which made everything quieter than it should have been. Back in the lodge, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the form I'd already filled out and signed. There was a pen in front of me. I picked it up, uncapped it, capped it again without writing anything. A lock that opens from the inside without a key can be a mechanical defect. I'd seen it before. Worn cylinder, weak spring. The cold makes the metal contract unevenly, and the latch doesn't have enough force to stay engaged. Possible. The chair I had no explanation for that satisfied me, but working memory is unreliable. I could have moved it again without realizing when I went back for the flashlight and just not registered the motion. Those were the explanations I had. I worked with them for about 20 minutes while I drank coffee that was too hot and then too cold. At 3 in the afternoon, I went out for a perimeter walk. It wasn't a scheduled task. It was the kind of thing you do when you can't sit still and you need to put your body in motion to get your head straight. I grabbed the flashlight out of habit and went out. I walked the path between the cabins from north to south, checking doors without going in. Everything shut. I came back on the parallel path closer to the tree line. The snow here was less disturbed. The wind had redistributed some of the buildup during the morning, smoothing out details, but not all of them. About 50 feet from cabin 7 on the forest side, there was an area where the snow was compacted differently. Not clear tracks, the wind had worked on them, but the impressions were there, and they came from the forest toward the cabin. Straight line. I stood at that spot for a moment, looked at the forest, looked at the cabin, looked back at the forest. Then I heard it. It started low, a dragging sound. Not a branch falling, not wind across a flat surface. It was weight in motion, broken up, stopping and starting again. It was coming from underneath the porch of cabin 7. I moved closer. Not fast, not too slow. The porch sat about 2 feet off the ground, enough space for something to shelter underneath. When I was about 20 feet away, I stopped. The dragging stopped with me. I stood still. The cold bit at the tip of my nose and the edges of my ears where my hat didn't cover. I took one slow, deep breath, trying not to make noise. That's when I heard the breathing. Wet, heavy, coming in a slow rhythm, like the breathing of something large at rest. It wasn't wind. Wind doesn't have a breathing rhythm, doesn't have that pause between exhale and inhale, doesn't carry that wet weight in the sound. It was organic. It was close. It was underneath the porch. I didn't move for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 2 minutes. The breathing kept its same rhythm. No hurry, no agitation. As if I wasn't there. As if I didn't matter. I backed away. 3 slow steps, keeping my eyes on the porch. Then 3 more. The breathing continued. No movement from underneath. No shape coming out. No sound of shifting weight. Just that wet, steady, indifferent breathing. When I got to about 60 feet, I turned and walked back to the lodge, still not running, but faster than before. Inside, I locked the door and got on the radio. Terry took longer to answer this time. When she did, I told her there was something large in the cabin area, underneath the porch of cabin 7, possibly moving between the structures. I said the tracks in the snow didn't match a bear or any animal I could identify by its prints. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I was safe in the lodge. I said yes. She said she was going to call the wildlife contact back, and in the meantime I should stay in the lodge, avoid the cabins until morning, and that Marcus might be able to come in earlier if she called him again. I didn't say anything about Marcus. I said okay, thanks, and hung up. I went to the hallway window. From there, cabin 7 was visible in the dusk, coming on fast. 5 in the afternoon. And already that washed-out winter end-of-day light that levels everything into the same gray tone. No movement around the cabin, but the space under the porch was too dark for me to see what was there. I stayed at the window for a while. The hallway light pulsed behind me, throwing my shadow unevenly on the opposite wall, growing and shrinking with each pulse. At one point, the light gave a longer pulse, went almost completely dark for 2 or 3 seconds. And in that gap, I saw the space under the porch of cabin 7 more clearly, because my own reflection had disappeared from the glass. There was something under there. Not a distinct shape, mass, volume that shouldn't have been there. In the dark beneath the porch, there was a compact, wide presence that stood apart from the background simply by occupying space differently than the shadows around it. The light came back. My reflection came back in the glass and blotted out the view of whatever was outside. I stepped away from the window. I ate something I don't clearly remember. I think it was the second sandwich, or the instant noodles I'd been saving for that point. I ate standing up next to the stove, still in my coat because the heater was off and I hadn't turned it back on. At 6:40, Terry's phone went straight to voicemail when I tried calling back. I left a message saying the situation had gotten clearer and that I'd prefer to have someone with me through the night. She didn't call back. Outside, it was completely dark. The security light in the parking area threw its usual yellow glow, creating a circle of visibility about 50 feet across. Beyond that circle, nothing. The sound of the breathing I'd heard under the porch kept replaying in my head with the maddening precision certain sounds have, the kind you relive with details you didn't ask for. Wet, heavy, unhurried. I checked the lock on the front door, checked the kitchen window, checked the service area door where the generator was propped against the wall, all locked. I went back to the hallway and stood there listening to the silence outside. The silence didn't last. The sound that pulled me out of the hallway was simple. A single knock, dry like heavy wood against heavy wood. It came from below, not from a lower floor because the lodge was single-story, but from below in the literal sense, under the floorboards. As if something had shifted against the foundation structure. I stood still and listened. It didn't repeat. The main lodge is a building from the 80s, pressure-treated wood over concrete blocks, with a crawl space underneath about 2 feet high, enough to run pipes through, not enough for a person to move around in. I knew this because I had inspected the access hatch the day before, a plywood cover in the corner of the utility area. It was secured with 2 screws. I went to check. The cover was in place, both screws too. No sign that it had been touched. I pressed my hand flat against the floorboards and held it there for a moment, feeling for vibration. Nothing. I went back to the hallway, sat down on the floor with my back against the wall, which is a strange thing to do and I know it. There was no chair there, just the wall and the cold floor. But I wanted my back covered and a sight line to both ends of the hallway at the same time. I stayed like that for about 10 minutes. The light pulsed. Outside, wind. Nothing else. Around 8 at night, I made a practical decision, which was the only category of decision I knew how to make. I was going to get in the truck and drive down to the park's main entrance, where the cell signal was stronger and, more importantly, where there was a structure of metal and glass around me that wasn't made of wood. It wasn't running away. It was repositioning. I could spend the rest of the night in the truck if I had to, and in the morning come back to do the exit protocol. I got ready slowly, put on my coat, my gloves, the form. I don't know why I grabbed the form. It was just paper. It wasn't going to change anything, but it was on the table and I took it. I grabbed the flashlight and the truck keys. At the front door, I stopped. I turned on the flashlight and swept the parking area before opening up. Ground covered in snow. No visible disturbance between the door and the truck. 20 yards, maybe. The security light lit up most of the way. I opened the door and went. The snow under my boots made that compressed sound of dry cold, each step a small burst of air. I covered the 20 yards without incident and got in the truck, pulled the door shut, locked it. The metal of the cab was so cold that my jacket stuck slightly to the seat back when I leaned in. I put the key in the ignition. The engine tried to turn over. It made the sound of an engine about to catch, that rising effort of the starter, and then it didn't catch. I tried again, same thing. Third time, the starter slowed down, like a battery hitting its limit, and then complete silence. I sat there with the key in my hand. The truck's battery was relatively new. I'd replaced it in September, before the start of the shutdown season. Cold affects batteries, I knew that, but not like this. Not with this level of drain. Unless I'd left some system running during the day without noticing. I tried the dashboard light. Nothing. The radio. Nothing. I put both hands on the steering wheel and breathed. The windshield was starting to fog over from the difference in temperature between my body and the frozen metal of the cab. In 30 seconds, I wasn't going to be able to see anything through the glass. I turned to the back seat where I kept my emergency kit. Jumper cables, flare, thermal blanket, the spare flashlight. The kit was there. The jumper cables too. What wasn't there was a second car to connect them to. I grabbed the spare flashlight and checked if it worked. It did. I got out of the truck, the cold hit back immediately. That layer the car had managed to dull for 2 minutes even without running. I stood beside the vehicle, flashlight in hand, thinking through the geometry of the situation. Lodge 20 yards away. Park entrance gate 3 miles down the road. No cell signal in between. The nearest house beyond the park was the property with the dogs, about 500 yards downhill, but in a straight line through the forest, not by road. I walked back across the parking area to the lodge. That's when I heard the breathing again. It wasn't from under the porch this time. It was off to the side, from the north edge of the parking area where the tree line sat about 50 feet from the pavement. Same rhythm I'd heard before, wet, heavy, unhurried, but closer. I stopped in the middle of the parking area. I aimed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. The beam reached the first few yards of the tree line. Pines, snow built up on the lower branches, the ground dark with needles where the snow didn't reach under the canopy. No movement I could make out. The breathing continued. There's something specific about not being able to see the source of a sound that is different from any other kind of fear I know. It's not the jolt of seeing something suddenly. It's the steady pressure of knowing something is there and that the darkness is on its side. not yours. I had the flashlight. I was in open space, and still the feeling was one of absolute disadvantage. I moved sideways toward the lodge door without taking the flashlight off the trees. The breathing stopped. Not gradually, stopped. As if whatever was breathing had simply decided to stop, or had moved beyond the range of my perception in 2 seconds, without making any sound of movement at all. I went inside, pulled the door shut, turned the deadbolt, and also pushed the slide lock I never used, because it always seemed both excessive and flimsy at the same time. I went to the kitchen window and looked out at the parking area. The truck was sitting in the center of the space, lit by the pole, doors closed, covered with a thin layer of fresh snow that had fallen while I was inside it. No figure anywhere, no movement. But there was, about 10 feet from the side of the truck, an area of snow that was different, compacted from above, not swept by the wind, as if something had stood there long enough to press the surface down under its own weight, right next to my truck, while I was inside trying to start the engine. I stayed in the kitchen until midnight, then went to the hallway, then came back to the kitchen. There was no logic to the movement. It was just my body refusing to stay still. At some point, I made more coffee and drank half of it. The heater was on, but I kept feeling cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. At 2 in the morning, I took stock of what I had. Spare flashlight with a full battery. A lighter. My work knife. The one I carry on my belt for cutting tape and cord, not for anything else, but it was what I had. First aid kit. 2 packs of instant noodles I wasn't going to be able to eat. Terry's radio, which I'd tried 3 times since midnight, and was getting nothing but static with an irregularity that didn't feel like weather interference. It felt like something else was causing it. I tried my phone again, a weak, fluctuating signal that wouldn't hold a call. I sent a text to Terry saying the truck wouldn't start, and that I needed someone out here first thing in the morning. It sat as undelivered for 40 minutes, and then disappeared from the pending screen without confirmation. Around 3, I heard the dragging again. This time it wasn't coming from under the porch of cabin 7. It was near the shed. I heard it because the utility area window was thinner than the others, single pane glass with no film, and sound came through with less filtering. Drag, pause, drag, weight moving at the rhythm I already knew. I stood in the utility area and listened. It stopped after about 2 minutes, not gradually. Stopped. I tried to sleep lying on the mattress with my coat and boots on. I closed my eyes, opened them, closed them again. The hallway light kept pulsing through the gap in the half-open door, that uneven rhythm I'd stopped noticing, and now couldn't stop noticing again. At 5:40, I gave up. I got up, drank the rest of the cold coffee, went to the window. Still dark, but the kind of dark that's giving way. Not black, deep gray with the horizon line outside slightly brighter than the rest. An hour, maybe less, before sunrise. I needed the backup radio in the shed. I'd reached that conclusion by process of elimination. The radio I had was Terry's. Park equipment, administrative frequency. The radio in the shed was mine, personal, the one I used for long-distance contact on remote jobs. Different frequency, different range, external battery I'd charged in September along with the trucks. If the problem with Terry's radio was the frequency being blocked by something in the area, mine would reach a different tower. The shed was 80 yards away. I stood at the window weighing that for a while. Outside, there were 80 yards of open snow between the lodge and the shed. I knew what was in the area. I knew the truck had died next to a weight impression in the ground without my hearing anything approach. I knew that whatever was out there moved with a silence that didn't match the size I estimated from the tracks. But without communication, I was going to spend more hours inside 4 walls waiting on a situation that wasn't going to resolve itself. I grabbed both flashlights, the knife, and the shed keys, went to the door and stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing outside. I opened up and moved out fast. The snow had stopped during the night and the ground was smooth, 8 inches of new accumulation on top of what was already there. My boots sank with each step, making that compressed sound that seemed too loud in the silence of that hour. I kept the flashlight aimed at the shed, not to the sides, because lighting up the sides showed me the forest, and the forest was something I'd rather not see just then. 80 yards. I counted my steps. I reached the shed without incident. I slid the door open. The track jammed as always, and I had to force it with my shoulder, the scrape of metal echoing louder than I wanted. I went in. I pulled the door back, but not all the way, because locking myself in wasn't an option, and leaving it too open wasn't either. Inside it was dark and smelled of metal and rubber. I aimed the flashlight at the shelves. The radio was where I'd left it, in a plastic case on the second shelf to the right. I grabbed the case, opened it, checked the battery. That's when the temperature of the air inside the shed changed, not gradually. It was like opening a refrigerator, a mass of colder air shifting through the gap I'd left in the door. Cold air from outside pushing in because something had changed on the other side, a blockage or a displacement of volume near the opening. I stood still with the radio in my hand. There was no sound. The absence of sound was the problem. When I'd come in, there had been a light wind moving through the pines, that continuous whisper of branches. That whisper was gone. I turned slowly toward the door. The gap I'd left, about 16 inches wide, was different. Not closed, not wider. Different. The gray line of dawn light coming through it was partially blocked. A wide, dark mass that hadn't been there when I came in. Still, low, occupying the lower part of the opening. It wasn't a tree's shadow. Tree shadows don't have volume. What was in that opening had thickness, had depth. It was taking up physical space. I didn't move. The mass didn't move either. I gauged the distance with the flashlight off. I didn't want the light giving away my position before I understood what was in the doorway. About 6 feet between me and the opening. The shelf on my left, the metal wall on my right, the back of the shed behind me with the generator and the cardboard boxes. No way out except the sliding door. The breathing started. Low, wet, at the same rhythm I already knew. But this time without the distance of the other times, without the porch and the snow between me and it. This time there was only the thin metal of the shed walls, the closed air, and about 6 feet. I stepped back. Then another step. My back touched the rear wall. The mass in the opening didn't come in, it stayed, filling the lower part of the gap with that volume I couldn't resolve into any shape I recognized, breathing in that slow rhythm that had no urgency and no hesitation. Then the sun came up. Not all at once. It was gradual, the light building outside over a few minutes, gray becoming white, the kind of diffuse snow morning brightness that comes from everywhere at once. And with the light, the mass in the opening lost its opacity. It didn't disappear, it shifted, pulled back, in silence with no sound of movement, none of the dragging I associated with it. It simply was no longer in the opening by the time there was enough light for me to see the ground outside. I stayed without moving for another 4 or 5 minutes. Then I went to the door, forced it all the way open, and stepped out fast into the open space. The snow in front of the shed was compacted in a wide semicircle around the opening. Uneven impressions, irregular pressure, no clean shape. It had been standing there outside long enough to compress the snow that way. Waiting. I walked back to the lodge with the radio gripped in my hand and didn't look back. The radio worked. Not right away. It took me about 10 minutes to adjust the frequency with my fingers still numb from the cold, missing the tuning twice before I found the channel that reached the Sheridan Tower. The voice that answered belonged to a dispatcher I didn't know, a young man who took a moment to understand what I was saying. I kept it short. Park employee, vehicle not running. No communication since the previous night, needed transportation and someone with authority over the area. He asked for my name, my employee number, my exact location. I gave him everything. He said he'd contact the Bighorn emergency line and that someone would get back to me within 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I hung up and looked at the clock. 6:22 in the morning. Outside, the diffuse snow light was already settled in. No direct sun. The sky too overcast for that. But enough light to see everything within the parking area's range without a flashlight. I sat down at the kitchen table and for the first time since the previous night, I felt the exhaustion physically. Not the sleeplessness kind, which I'd carried all night as a weight behind my eyes. This was different, deeper, the kind that surfaces when the body understands the most critical part has passed and releases what it's been holding back. It wasn't time to release anything. I got up, drank some water, went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my face. The tap water was nearly freezing despite the heater, a sign that the pipe temperature had dropped more than the system could compensate for. I looked at myself in the mirror for a second. Nothing dramatic. Just a 52-year-old man who hadn't slept and was wearing a wrinkled work coat. I went back to the hallway. The light had stopped pulsing. Not because I'd fixed it. It had simply stopped, burned out completely, or the wiring problem had reached some point of collapse. The hallway was dark now, with morning light coming in through the windows at each end, which created uneven illumination, darker in the middle than at the sides. I went to the hallway window that faced the cabin row. Cabin 7's door was closed. The snow in front of it was disturbed in a way I couldn't resolve into any clear pattern. Could have been wind, could have been weight. No visible figure anywhere between the lodge and the cabins. I went back to the kitchen. It was 23 minutes, not 40, before the radio called. The voice was Terry's, not the dispatcher, Terry herself, in a tone I hadn't heard from her before. Drier, faster than her usual. I told her I was okay, that I needed a ride, that the vehicle's battery was dead. She said there was a ranger leaving Buffalo right now and he'd arrive in 40 minutes via Cloud Peak Scenic Byway if the road was passable. She asked if I had gone outside. I said yes early that morning to get the radio from the shed. She was quiet for a moment and then said I should stay inside until the ranger got there. I said I would. I hung up and went to the utility area to check the door. Locked. Went to the front door. Locked. Went back to the hallway. That's when I heard the noise on the roof. It wasn't the wind. Wind on a roof has a distributed sound, pressure against a flat surface, the creak of the structure responding. This was different. It was localized impact, weight in motion, shifting from one point to another at uneven intervals, like something repositioning itself. Coming from the north end of the roof toward the center. I stopped in the middle of the hallway and looked up at the ceiling. The noise stopped. I stood still for a full minute. 2. The roof went quiet. Then the utility area window broke. Not gradually. The glass gave all at once, the flat crack of a pane breaking under lateral pressure, followed by the sound of fragments hitting the concrete floor of the utility area. Followed immediately by a sound I'm going to try to describe, but won't get quite right. Something dense coming through the gap, the breathing I already knew now with nothing filtering it between me and it, and the groan of the window frame being widened by pressure that had no reason to be careful. I left the hallway through the opposite end. Kitchen, front door. The lock was a metal lever that turned 90 degrees. I turned it, pulled the door. The door didn't open. It wasn't locked from outside. The mechanism had worked. I felt the latch retract. The door simply didn't open. I pulled with both arms, put my foot against the wall, and pulled. The door gave millimeters and came back, as if there was pressure on the other side. From the utility area came the sound of heavy movement in a confined space, the generator being shoved aside, a shelf coming down, metal against metal. The breathing underneath all of it the whole time. Rhythmic, unhurried. I went out through the kitchen window. It was a double-hung window, double pane, locked with a metal rod in the upper track. I removed the rod, forced the lower panel. It stuck. I forced it again with my whole shoulder. It opened about 6 inches and locked up. Wood swollen with moisture. The same problem as cabin 3 a few days back, and for one absurd second I thought about that specifically. About cabin 3. About the dripping pipe, for no reason I can explain. 6 inches wasn't enough. I grabbed the flashlight barrel and hit the frame. Once, twice. On the third strike, the window gave another 3 or 4 inches. I pushed the radio and the flashlight out first, then the form because it was still in my hand for some reason I can't explain. And then I squeezed through the gap however I could, tearing the sleeve of my coat on the side latch, landing with my hands in the snow outside. I got up. From the utility area came a new sound. That groan of structural wood under load, the kind that comes before a collapse. The side wall was giving. I moved away from the lodge toward the parking area, picking up the radio and the flashlight from the ground as I walked. I didn't run, not because I was brave, but because the snow was 16 inches deep in some spots, and running in deep snow is a guaranteed fall, and going down out there at that moment was the worst possible outcome. I walked fast, looked back once. The utility area wall had a new deformation, an irregular bulge, as if something large had pressed from the inside against the wood without breaking through. Above it, on the roof, there were impression marks I hadn't seen before. Deep, irregular, spaced in a way that didn't match any pattern I knew. I reached the center of the parking area and stopped. Outside, the park was silent. Snow, trees, the security light pole dark now that it was daytime. The dead truck covered in white. 40 minutes until the ranger from Buffalo. Probably less by now. I turned on the radio. The ranger's name was Reyes. I don't know his full name. He said it when he got out of the car and I didn't hold on to it. He was around 30, Park Service uniform, with the look of someone who'd been called out too early and hadn't yet processed what the dispatcher had described. He arrived in 31 minutes. I counted. I stayed in the center of the parking area the whole time. I didn't go back to the lodge, didn't go near the cabins, didn't approach the tree line. I stood with the radio in my hand and my feet sunk in the snow, watching the edges of my field of vision. The sun didn't come out. The sky was too overcast. That flat November coverage that levels everything. But the light built up enough for me to see all the way to the tree line without needing a flashlight. No visible movement anywhere during those 31 minutes. When Reyes's car came through the main gate and drove up the access road to the parking area, I felt something that wasn't exactly relief. It was more like the sound a structure makes when the pressure on it is suddenly removed. A loosening. He got out of the car, and I walked over and said, before anything else, that there was something large in the area, and that we needed to leave now, and talk through the rest from inside his car. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the lodge, at the utility area wall where the deformation was visible from there, the irregular bulge in the wood. Then he looked back at me. He said, "Let's go." I got in the passenger seat. He got in on the driver's side, pulled the door shut. The car was warm and the smell of coffee from a thermos was so ordinary that for a second, it destabilized something in me in a way the rest of the night hadn't managed to. I told him everything while he listened without interrupting. The tracks in the snow, the breathing under the porch, the truck battery, the shed, the broken window, the wall giving way. He listened with the expression of someone trying to fit new information into a system that wasn't built to receive it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if I had seen the animal directly. I said I had seen volume, mass, an incomplete silhouette, that I hadn't seen the whole animal clearly at any point. He picked up the dashboard radio and called the Buffalo Dispatch Center. He reported the situation in protocol language. Large unidentified animal, structural damage, isolated employee, requesting contact with wildlife management. The center confirmed receipt and said they'd reached the on-call biologist. While he was on the radio, I looked at the lodge through the car window. The front door was open. Not broken open. Open. The same door I hadn't been able to open from the inside when I was trying to get out. Open about 16 inches, swaying slightly in the wind. I didn't say anything to Reyes right away. I kept looking. The opening was dark inside. The hallway light had burned out. No light from inside at all. Nothing was coming out through the opening. Nothing was going in. Reyes put the radio down and said the instruction was to wait in the vehicle until the biologist arrived, which would probably take 2 hours coming from Laramie. 2 hours. I looked at the clock. 7:43 in the morning. I told him the front door was open. He looked, was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on his holster. Didn't draw, just rested his hand there. And stayed like that, watching the lodge. I asked if he had the right firepower for an animal the size of what I described. He said he had his service pistol and a rifle in the trunk. He asked what size I was estimating. I said, large. Larger than it should be for anything I know from this region. He didn't respond to that. We both looked at the lodge for a while without speaking. The door stayed open. The wind moved it from time to time. That slow swing of an unlatched door. Inside, darkness. That's when I heard it. Faint. but from inside a closed car with the engine still running, it was distinguishable. The dragging. Coming from the side, from the direction of the cabins, moving slowly toward the parking area. I put my hand on Reyes's arm and he stopped breathing for a second. He was hearing it too. The sound continued for about 20 seconds and then stopped. There was nothing visible in the open stretch between the cabins and the parking area. Open snow, no figure, no cast shadow that didn't correspond to the trees. Reyes put the car in reverse with a calm, deliberate motion. I understood what he was doing and didn't argue. I had my master key in my pocket, the radio, the flashlight. The signed form was somewhere in the snow outside the kitchen window where I'd thrown it on the way out. I didn't go back for it. The car reversed across the parking area to the start of the access road. Reyes took the turn slowly, without any sudden rush. The kind of movement that isn't flight, but isn't staying either. When the tires found the snow-covered asphalt of the access road, he shifted into drive. That's when she appeared. At the edge of the headlights' reach, which were on despite it being daytime because Reyes drove with his headlights always on. I'd noticed that when he arrived, about 40 yards ahead, in the middle of the access road. She wasn't still. She was moving side to side in a way that took me a second to process as movement, because it didn't match what I expected from any four-legged animal. Wide, low when she moved, but with a shoulder height that the surrounding snow made smaller, and at the same time, clearer. The fur was sparse. Even at 40 yards, even in the flat light of a snow morning, you could see skin showing through the tufts in an irregular pattern, grayish. Reyes braked. We sat there with the headlights on her for maybe 8 seconds. She didn't stop moving. That slow lateral drift, as if she were measuring the space. Her head was down. You couldn't see the eyes from where we were. Then she left the road on the left side and disappeared into the trees without any sound of movement reaching us inside the car. Reyes kept his foot on the brake for about 15 seconds after she disappeared. Then he accelerated. We didn't say anything during the 3 miles to the main gate. When we cleared the park and reached the Cloud Peak Scenic Byway with real asphalt under the tires and a cell signal appearing in the corner of my phone screen, Reyes pulled over onto the shoulder and sat with both hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead for a long moment. Then he said, "I've never seen anything like that." I said, "Neither had I." The biologist from Laramie arrived at 10:30 in the morning in a service vehicle with another man who wasn't formally introduced. He stayed near the car the whole time, looking out at the park with the expression of someone cataloging information and not planning to share any of it. The biologist's name was Strand. White hair, early 60s, dark green anorak with the university logo almost worn off the sleeve. He listened to me sitting in the back of Reyes's car with a notepad on his lap, taking notes I couldn't read from where I was. He asked about the snow impressions with a level of detail that surprised me. Distance between depressions, estimated depth, weight distribution, whether there was any visible claw mark or just wide surface pressure. I asked if he had any theories. He said he'd need to see the marks before anything else. I didn't ask again. Around 11, Reyes drove me to the gas station in Buffalo that had a diner attached. Red vinyl seats and coffee that was bad but hot. I stayed there while he went back to the park with Strand and the other man. Before he left, he told me someone would come back for me when they'd finished the initial assessment, and that I should call Terry to let her know my status. I called Terry from the vinyl seat. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual. I told her I was okay, that I'd left the park with Reyes, that the lodge had structural damage in the utility area, and that she'd have my full report by end of day. She said thank you in a way that sounded like more than one thing at once. The kind of thank you that carries weight that isn't being said out loud. After a silence of 2 or 3 seconds, she said, "They found Marcus." I stayed quiet and waited for the rest. She said Marcus's car had been found on the shoulder of the park's secondary entrance. Not the main gate off the Cloud Peak Byway, but the service access on the east side, used only by staff, about 400 yards from the cabin row. The car had been there since before nightfall the previous day, key in the ignition. Driver's door not fully closed. I asked where Marcus was. She said they didn't know yet, that the car was there and Marcus wasn't. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment without saying anything. Outside the diner window was the main street of Buffalo with its Saturday morning traffic, a red pickup waiting at the light, a woman with a small dog tucked inside her jacket. Everything completely normal and completely unreal at the same time. I told Terry I'd write the report as soon as I got somewhere with a computer. She said that was fine, said she'd keep me updated on Marcus. I hung up. Marcus had called me Thursday morning to confirm the job. He'd said he'd get to the park around 3 in the afternoon the next day. He sounded fine, normal voice, had made a joke about the snow forecast that I hadn't found funny, but had laughed politely at anyway. Then on Friday, Terry called to say he was under the weather, that he wasn't going to make it, but his car was in the park. I sat turning that information over the way you work a sore tooth, with your tongue coming back to it, unable to stop and unable to resolve it. Marcus had arrived at the park. He'd parked at the east service access, which was the one that came out closest to the cabins along the tree line. He'd left the door not fully closed, and then no one had seen him again. The coffee went cold while I looked out the window. The man behind the counter asked if I wanted more, and I said yes out of reflex, and he filled the cup with fresh coffee that was also going to go cold because I was going to forget to drink it. I tried to put together a sequence that made sense and couldn't get it to hold together for more than 30 seconds before I found something that didn't fit. Marcus had arrived and never made contact, hadn't called me, hadn't called Terry, hadn't shown up at the main lodge where I was. He'd left his car at the east access and disappeared in the direction of the forest that ran between that access road and the cabins. The same forest the tracks came from. I didn't follow that line of thought all the way to the end. Not right then. I went as far as I could and then deliberately stopped and looked at my coffee cup and thought about the concrete fact that I was genuinely hungry for the first time in 18 hours and that I should eat something. I ordered scrambled eggs and toast, ate all of it. It had no taste, but I ate it. Reyes came back at 2 in the afternoon. He came into the diner, ordered coffee, sat across from me. He had that expression of work that ended but didn't finish, the kind of thing that stays hanging. He said the snow impressions had been documented by Strand, that the damage to the lodge was real and would need repair before spring, that the biologist hadn't given a formal hypothesis yet. I asked about Marcus. He said a search had been activated, that a team was heading out from Sheridan in the afternoon. He didn't say anything else about Marcus. I didn't ask again either. He gave me a ride to Casper because it was on his way, and because my truck was dead in the park parking lot, and was going to stay there until someone sent a tow truck on Monday. It was 2 hours and 40 minutes of road, most of it in a silence neither of us tried to fill with conversation. Somewhere between Buffalo and Casey, he turned on the radio to a country station that played 3 songs before it started breaking up into static, and he turned it off again. When he dropped me off in front of my apartment in Casper, in front of the sand-colored building where I've lived for 4 years without painting anything or buying any furniture beyond what was necessary, he said he'd need a formal statement on Monday. I said that was fine. He waited until I was inside before he drove away. I noticed that. Inside, I took my boots off in the hallway, then my coat, then my socks. Went straight to the shower and stood under the hot water for a length of time I didn't measure. The tear in my coat sleeve I'd only notice later, when I went to wash it, and I'd try to fix it with the sewing thread I keep in a cookie tin, because my mother taught me that sewing thread in a cookie tin is the difference between a man who figures things out and one who doesn't. I don't know why I thought about that in the shower, but I did. I got out, dried off, lay down on the bed. I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there looking at the ceiling, thinking about Marcus's car parked at the east access with the door not fully closed and the key in the ignition, thinking about whoever had called me Thursday morning to confirm the job, and about how completely normal the voice had sounded. 8 months later, I went to pick up my truck. Not the bighorn truck. That one the tow had taken the following Monday. Battery replaced. Problem fixed in 40 minutes according to the mechanic in Buffalo who sent the invoice to Terry, and Terry forwarded to me by email with a "thanks for the work" in the body of the message, which was everything there was between us since November. The truck I went to pick up in July was a different one, a 2019 F-150. I'd left at my brother-in-law's place in Gillette when I went to a job in Idaho in March, and hadn't had a chance to pick up since. Nothing dramatic. Just the kind of loose end that piles up when you live job to job without a fixed base. Gillette is 2 hours from Buffalo on the I-90. I knew that when I agreed to pick up the truck in July. I knew I'd pass through Buffalo. I knew I'd pass the Cloud Peak Scenic Byway turnoff that leads to Bighorn. I drove straight through, didn't even slow down. But I looked. Through the driver's side window for about 3 seconds, I saw the brown park sign and the access road disappearing between the trees, and then I put my eyes back on the road and kept going. I don't know what I expected to see. Nothing, probably. It was July. The park was open. There was a family car parked near the entrance with a kid climbing out the back door. Completely normal. Completely far from November. Marcus was never found. That's the concrete fact. The search lasted 11 days. Teams from Sheridan and Laramie. A tracking dog that lost the scent at the tree line north of the cabins after about 200 yards. The final report Reyes sent me by email in February, after I asked 3 times, used the word inconclusive in 4 separate paragraphs. The car was at the east access. Marcus wasn't anywhere they'd found. Marcus's family, a sister in Cheyenne, according to Reyes, had filed a missing persons case, which remained open. Which would probably remain open indefinitely, because 11 days of searching a mountain forest with accumulated snow and below zero temperatures doesn't leave much to resolve afterward. Strand, the biologist, sent a report to the Park Service in January that Reyes summarized for me in a 10-minute phone call, because I asked directly, and he was the kind of person who answers when asked directly. The report identified the impressions as being of animal origin, not cataloged in the known regional fauna. It used terms like morphological anomaly and unidentified specimen. It didn't use any term I could repeat to anyone without that person looking at me in a specific way. Strand had requested authorization to set up a monitoring operation in the park during the following winter. The authorization was under review. That was in January. I didn't find out what happened after that. In Gillette, I picked up the truck, had lunch with my brother-in-law at a steakhouse he went to every week that had oversized televisions mounted on every wall. He asked how work was going. I said fine, that I had a job in Oregon in September. That winter depended on what came up. He said I should think about settling somewhere. I said maybe. We've been having that conversation for 4 years in slightly different versions, and neither of us expects it to go anywhere. Back on the road, heading west on the I-90, I drove a long stretch with the radio off. Wyoming in July is a completely different thing. The green on the hillsides, the high sky, the dry heat that chaps your lips in half an hour with the window down. Hard to fit November into that picture. Not impossible, but hard. What stayed with me isn't what I expected to stay. It's not the breathing under the porch, even though I hear it sometimes with enough clarity to sit up in bed in the middle of the night. It's not the mass in the shed doorway, or the silhouette in Reyes's headlights that I replay with details I don't ask for and can't control. It's not even the wall giving way, while I was on the inside trying to open a door that wouldn't open. It's Marcus calling Thursday morning with a normal voice, making a joke about snow. It's his car at the east access with the door not fully closed. It's Terry saying not feeling well, and me accepting that without question, because Marcus sometimes didn't show, because everyone doesn't show sometimes, because I had work to do, and it wasn't my job to check whether my co-workers were okay. I went to that park knowing I'd be alone until morning. I went with that information and did the work inside it. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, what maybe nobody knew, is that alone wasn't exactly the right word for the night I had. Marcus had arrived at the park before me. He'd parked at the east access in the late afternoon. He'd gotten out of his car for some reason, into the park, into the forest, somewhere that made sense to him in that moment. And then he didn't come back to the car. 11 days of searching, a tracking dog that lost the scent. I stopped thinking in that direction at the same point every time, which is when the image starts acquiring details I wasn't there to see, and that my brain manufactures anyway. It's not a conscious process, and it's not one I've learned to fully control. I've learned to cut it off before it goes too far. I stop, Look at the road. Turn on the radio. The Oregon job starts in September. Trail maintenance in a national forest area near Astoria. Different work from winterizing. More outdoors. A crew of 4. I've been to Oregon twice before. It's a state that treats me well. Before accepting the job, I asked, out of reflex or out of new habit, whether there had been any unusual wildlife activity in the area. The job coordinator asked why I wanted to know. I said it was standard precaution. He said there was nothing in the report. I said thank you and took the job. I saved Reyes's number in my phone in November, and it's still there. Never called since the January call. Don't know if I will. Don't know if there's anything he could tell me that would be any different from inconclusive. Wyoming fell away behind me as I drove. The Bighorn turnoff had been behind me for an hour. The kid I'd seen climbing out of the family car was probably at the lake by now, or on a trail, or in the parking lot eating a snack while the parents folded the map. Completely normal. I turned on the radio, found a station out of Casper playing classic rock. Tom Petty, that Running Down a Dream song my mother loved and I never loved, but right then it played all the way through without me changing the station. I drove.